What's up, YouTube? Capital G here. Alright guys, so gonna give you guys a small discussion slash deck idea with one of my favorite cards of all time, Fairy Box. Now, Fairy Box came out forever ago. I'm talking LON, Labyrinth of Nightmare. This is a really old card. This is probably one of my top 5 cards of all time. Let me go ahead and tell you guys the effect for those of you guys who don't know. I'm not going to read it verbatim. Basically, when your opponent's monster declares an attack, you flip a coin, you call heads or tails. If you call it right, their opponent's or that monster's attack goes to 0. So, what does this mean? The gist of it is, let's say you have Gores on the field and I have Plague Spreader on the field. And you attack, and I flip over Fairy Box, and I call heads, and it lands heads. Your Gores will go to 0 attack, and your Gores will die via battle. You'll also take 400 damage because of my Plague Spreader, and my Plague Spreader will live. So, this card actually reminds me a lot of Magic Drain. I look at it and I'm like, the downside is it really that much of a downside? When you look at Magic Drain, it never really saw a ton of competitive play, but it's like either I get a 1-for-1 or you get your spell effect, but I go +1. So which of those is the downside? With Fairy Box, it's like either a monster dies that was supposed to die anyway, but the upside is so far through the roof. I mean, you lose your monster, my monster lives, and you take damage. And you probably have wasted your battle phase. Not to mention that the maintenance cost for this being only 500 life points, which is optional, is so freaking, it's so ridiculously low. You look at this format, I mean, you're paying 4 times that to summon or to negate the spell, or a special summon or normal summon or flip summon of a monster in Silent Warning. I mean, and for God's sakes, we're paying half of our life points to summon E-Heroes. So, I mean, 500 life points is nothing. Now, back during Teledad format, I actually ran Fairy Box competitively. And there was a regional where I actually started 4-0. You know, obviously, once I started playing a couple of Teledads, you know, that obviously changed. Can't do much against your Crush card with Glads. But one of the reasons why Fairy Box was so good in the deck is because when I talk about that upside of your opponent loses a monster, they lose their battle phase, and they take damage, in a deck like Glads, you can capitalize even more because, you know, in addition to all that, you think about the fact that I get to tag out during your turn. You never want me to tag during your turn. I mean, God's sakes, that's what you don't want. And then you have to also remember that cards like DD Warrior Lady and Grandma, which I was also running at the time, these are really nifty in conjunction with Fairy Box because guess what? Let's say I activate, or Fairy Box is already active, or I activate it, you know, and you attack into my DD Warrior Lady or my Grandma. I can flip the coin, and if I flip it wrong, I can still bounce with Grandma. Or if I flip it wrong, I can still choose to remove your monster, so I'm not really losing out. You know what I mean? But if I call it right, obviously I'm not going to activate their effects. I'm going to leave my monster on the board and punish you with that next turn. Now, one of the ways that you can kind of mitigate calling it wrong with Fairy Box is doing battle phase tricks. This is what I used to do in GBs all the time. We'll move Lance for a second. But I also played Mirror Wall and Shrink. So I'd have like Bestiary on the field. My opponent would attack with Stardust, and I'd be like Fairy Box. They didn't know what it did, of course. And if I called it wrong for some reason, I'd be like, okay, that's cool. Damage step, activate, shrink, or mirror wall. Your Stardust still dies, and I still get to tag out. So this card was absolutely the nuts in GB. Obviously, you probably replace shrink with something like Forbidden Lance now. One of the ways that you can beat Fairy Box, and nobody knows this because most players are too stupid to actually read and try and comprehend my battle strategy, but one of the ways you can beat Fairy Box is you simply don't attack. Since you have a 50% chance of losing your monster every time you attack the player who has Fairy Box, as long as they have a monster face-up attack position anyway. The simple way that you beat it is you put a monster on the board like a Caius or a Stardust or something like that, and you choose not to attack. Either the Fairy Box player will struggle to get around your big monster, or they'll burn themselves to death slowly. Glad Beast didn't have this problem. The reason why is because Glad Beast can still make advantage just by every single turn, attack tag, attack tag, attack tag, attack tag. You know, if you're trying to stall me out with monsters like Spirit Reaper or something like that, I mean, it's just attack tag. Either I'm blowing up stuff with Bestiary, I'm blowing up stuff with Murmillo, and then once I get something like Chariot, I mean, you no longer have access to effects, and I'm just going to juggle that. If you TT my monsters, I've got stuff like a Quest and Darius to make sure that, you know, I can always get my monsters back. So GB can play around the whole trying to stall your opponent out. Now, one of the decks that I really thought about trying to get Fairy Box and trying to squeeze it into was this deck right here, TG Stun. And the reasoning is Just like GBs, it has the battle phase tricks. Like, let's say I have Beast King on the field, right? And you attack with Stardust. I activate Fairy Box and I call it wrong. Okay, well, before the attack goes through, I can activate Skill Drain. Skill Drain will make my Beast King 3000, your Stardust will die. Or in the damage step, I can activate Horn of the Phantom Beast and your Stardust will die again. You know, let's say I have a basic TG, you know what I mean? Like a Rush Rhino and you have a Thunder King. Well, not only could I still do the Horn if I call it wrong, but, well, actually, let's use Saber Source instead of Thunder King. If my monster would die, like my Rush Rhino would die, or my TG Werewolf would die, well, then does it really matter? Because I get to search in the end phase anyway. So if I'm still searching off my TGs if they die, but if they don't die, and I call it right, I get a huge tempo turn, or a huge momentum swing. Then, I mean, I look at Fairy Box and I'm like, yeah, it can really work in this deck. Now, the reason why I'm not so high on it in a deck like TG Stun is because TG Stun cannot create the type of offense that GBs can. If your opponent puts a bigger monster on the field than you have in TG Stun and they refuse to attack, it can be kind of difficult to get around it unless you have Skill Drain. Skill Drain actually converts a lot of this defense into offense because it basically says a lot of our monsters get bigger and a lot of your monsters can't get bigger because, you know, Skill Drain locks them down. So I'm not so sure if I'm as high on a deck or on a card like Fairy Box and TGs, although it works perfectly. It doesn't work as good in a deck like GBs because you can't stall against GBs. All they're going to do is just keep attacking and tagging. If you try and put a monster on the field, they'll flip it with Book, they'll evac it to your hand, they'll activate Safe Zone on their monster and attack and tag, and they'll just attack, tag, and they'll make advantage. Now, the one deck that I came to the conclusion that I actually liked it in, and this is going to sound weird, but it's Watts. Like, I actually love this card in Watts because think about it. Cards like Watt Dragonfly, you know what I mean? If the Watt Dragonfly dies, who cares? I get another Watt anyway. But if it doesn't die and that Fairy Box activates and I get it right, I mean, you lose 900, you lose your monster, you lose your battle phase, and I'm going to attack you directly next turn. The same thing goes with a card like Watt Cobra. As soon as I get one attack through, Watt Cobra is paid for itself, so I don't care if it dies. But if it doesn't die, you are colossally boned. And the thing is, when you have Fairy Box on the field, your opponent can't really risk attacking anything face-up attack position because you still have the option. You have a 50% chance of their monster dying. Are you going to risk your Stardust or your Thunder King or your Lagia on a 50% chance of dying to a fucking Watt Cobra? No, of course not. Another thing is, Watts can also do some of those battle phase tricks. Some of the, you know, like TGs can do Horn of the Phantom Beast and Skill Drain. GBs can do Lance. Well, guess what? All Watts are light, so you can use Honest. So if you're in a tight spot and you need that monster to live and Fairy Box doesn't go your way, okay, well, activate Honest, my monster still lives. And the thing about it is, I thought about it. I was like, well, Watts don't have good attack power. They can't really synchro or exceed particularly well. What if my opponent just tries to stall me? You know what I mean? How do I get around that? And that's when I started thinking, Watts are the perfect deck to get around that. If your opponent puts a Thunder King in front of you, and then they put another monster in front of you, and they just refuse to attack in your Fairy Box, okay, well, you know what? Guess what? Summon Watt Hopper, summon Watt Giraffe, attack directly. Watts play by a different set of rules in the fact that they don't want to grind out in battle with monsters. All they want to do is just keep attacking at your life points. So if I can put you in a position to where I keep attacking your life points with my Watt Cobra and Watt Giraffe, but you can't attack my Watts for fear of losing a ton of advantage, I mean, I'm going to have a very easy track to winning the game. It's also worth mentioning that cards like Evac Device, Book of Moon, they can be activated even if Fairy Box misses. You can still activate cards that will remove that would stop your opponent's attack as long as they don't respond directly to an attack. If you call Fairy Box wrong, you can't activate something like Mirror Force or Dimensional Prison because the attack has already been declared. But you can still activate things like Evac Device and Book of Moon. Obviously, you can still do things in the battle phase or the damage step like Honest and Forbidden Lance. I don't know if I would run Forbidden Lance because the Watt monster's attacks are a little too low to make me think that Forbidden Lance is ideal. But I think that at upcoming regionals, maybe down the road, I might actually consider playing Watts. And one of the cards that I definitely am going to play is Fairy Box because I really love this card. So let me know what you guys think about this crazy regional deck idea. And thank you guys for watching as always.